Well, thank you, Rich. I guess it's now good afternoon. Following on in this session, which is a focus on regulatory issues, I've been asked to provide an industry experience and perspective based upon extensive interaction with the cooperative groups and Genentech. And we'll have an opportunity in the panel to extend that to my colleague from Merck. To frame the issue, and just to say that we're all on the same ground here, the national investment in phase 3 clinical trials is, as I think was said earlier today by Monica, to advance the standard of care for cancer patients and specifically to address unmet medical need. And many in the pharmaceutical industry share this same passion and objective. But the financial investment in the pharmaceutical industry is to achieve marketing authorization of new products and then the extension of use. Regulatory approval is important not just for an NDA and BLA, but for their supplements, because this is needed for appropriate product labeling to inform clinical use and patient safety, and more to assure patient access. So partnerships between industry and the cooperative groups then have the potential for convergence on the basis of scientific interests, resources, expertise, and societal benefit. You've seen a modification of this slide earlier in Dr. Abe's presentation, but this is a table that represents the supplemental biologic license applications that Genentech achieved with the cooperative groups. And they span the gamut from trastuzumab in early breast cancer, rituximab in indolent and aggressive non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and then bevacizumab in advanced non-small cell lung cancer, colorectal cancer, and renal cell cancer. And just on a personal note, having been the ECOG lymphoma chair for more than 10 years and the senior investigator for these rituximab trials, I can tell you that as an investigator, there was a great deal of professional satisfaction in participating in trials that led to registration, as well as a certain amount of pride, I think, among the members of the cooperative group. And in addition, I think it's a way of honoring the patients who participated in these trials. Now, having said that, as you can see, we kept the agency quite busy in the 2006 to 2009 timeframe, and there were a number of issues that came to light, and I want to go through some of these. So this early experience from cooperative group trials included a trial known as E2100. This was a study of paclitaxel with or without bevacizumab in metastatic breast cancer that fell short of the FDA data quality standards. This was an unblinded study with a PFS endpoint, and you heard from Lori some of the issues surrounded that, and it was also not originally intended for registration. Subsequently, additional data were collected and analyses were performed, but regulatory and advisory committee concerns remained all the way from 2007 through 2011. And what this led to was change in the cooperative group studies with registrational potential, both in terms of discussing with the agency those studies that could have potential and also what those standards might be. In addition, as you heard from Lori, there was concern around E2100 for investigator bias, and that was addressed retrospectively with an independent radiology facility review. 90% rather than 100% of the scans were collected, and there was also reader discordance. And it was early days and learning, and this resulted in concerns on the part of the agency and the advisory committee, again extending from that period of time of 2007 to 2011, but it also led to independent evaluations and subsequently an FDA analysis, which Lori just went through. I also noticed that I have a slightly earlier version of my slides, and I'll just add to some of the points as we go forward. So some of the lessons learned with regard to data quality and also the interest in the agency of having end of phase 2 meetings so that there can be input on the phase 3 design and the statistical analysis is the indication that the data quality needed to be more industry-like. And so that included safety data that would have onset and resolution dates, more complete safety data versus targeted adverse event data, reconciling the expedited adverse events or ADEARs with the clinical AE database in an internally consistent database, symmetrical data collection on both arms, and collecting all data as of a specific cutoff date, documenting why physicians or patients stop therapy, and having procedures in place to minimize missing forms and fields. There were also lessons learned by independent review, and maybe this will just serve to emphasize some of the comments that you heard from Lori. But that additional research by FDA and the independent groups found, in fact, that there was no evidence of systematic investigator bias for the PFS endpoint, with the remarkable correlation that you saw in her presentation and here again, and that reader discordance at the patient level was relatively common. And in addition, there was potential for bias on the part of the IRF reading based on informative censoring. And then in 2012, ODAC discussed the potential for a random audit by the IRF with a PFS endpoint in non-hematologic malignancies. It was interesting that the discussion came about the threat of an audit. I think E2100 was a good example where there was no known threat, and yet you saw this correlation. But the importance, of course, could be to reduce the cost and burden of the IRF, avoid some of the missing data issues, and mitigate informative censoring. And I think it's really important as we talk about this or anything else that to recognize that the trials now are done globally. They're done for global registration. So anything that we're talking about here really requires global agreement, and the next talk will focus on that as well. In addition, lessons learned for key elements for partnership. That is, it's important to clarify the regulatory requirements prospectively. Again, this has to be able to satisfy global authorities. And for industry and the cooperative groups to clearly delineate the expectations of each party. What the deliverables and anticipated timelines will be, important issues about ownership of the data and biosamples, intellectual property, and the plan for publications, presentations, and other forms of communication. And very importantly, and really the foundation, is mutual respect for scientific expertise and the need for both academic and industry freedom to operate. So as we think about these partnerships, there really needs to be a balance, if you will, of the benefit and risks for industry to participate with the cooperative groups. And there are a lot of pluses here: scientific interest, societal benefit, patient resources, expertise, operational ability, the financial attractiveness, and partnership. And I wouldn't underestimate this issue of partnership. There's a great deal of pleasure, I would say, in doing clinically meaningful work in a partnered fashion, and that goes a long way in the attractiveness of working with the cooperative groups. On the other side, we have the things that need to be balanced, and I'll go into that in a little bit more detail. But these are the trade-offs that are being considered. So some of those considerations, as I've said previously, the need to satisfy global regulatory bodies. And more what we're seeing is they want the data set that comes through to be representative of their national patient population and ethnic populations, just as you've heard from our ODAC members when some of the applications came through. And then there are multiple risks that are associated with the loss of control. One of these includes the timely prioritization of the study concept and the levels of review. And I'll go into that in a little bit more detail. The ability to influence the study design and conduct, the ability to meet timelines, and importantly to adapt operations as necessary to keep those timelines maintained, ownership and use of data, companion diagnostic development, which is of course more and more important. I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail, and the ability to direct biomarker research and leverage those biosamples for pipeline development. And as opposed to what was going on in that 2006 to 2010 timeframe, today, oncology is a very competitive business. The environment is really full, and there are multiple molecules that are competing for the same targets. Going into a little bit more detail about the considerations for the development of targeted agents. As you've heard in the talks, particularly from Jeff today and those yesterday, the science of oncology has evolved with the recognition of distinct disease subsets. So we now have lung cancers. And predictive diagnostics have become more essential to drug development, companion diagnostics needed for new product approval. And when we think about this in reality, there's the potential for the diagnostic test to actually delay the therapeutic approval. If you move into the supplemental BLA and NDA area, there's a question then that comes up about the relevance of a diagnostic subset in another disease setting, and that also requires testing. And the definition of what is diagnostic positive could vary across these disease settings or lines of therapy. And then, of course, clinical trials with integral biomarkers or biomarker endpoints are becoming more prevalent. For industry, having their own repository of annotated specimens is really valuable for pipeline development and exploratory biomarker research. The adequacy and representativeness of diagnostic tissues used for clinical trial eligibility are key, as we're learning more and more. And there are trade-offs of biosample ownership, and these trade-offs have become more important in these types of partnership considerations. Well, speaking to the evolution of Genentech's interaction with the cooperative groups, this has evolved to formal contracts with terms that govern the cooperative group research for investigational agents that have registrational potential. This includes payments that are fixed and milestone for additional study conduct, data management costs, and personnel. Prospective agreement on what the source verification will be, the data collection and cleaning plan. Agreements on publications, presentations, communications, study report and results, inventions, intellectual property, and then really importantly, the safety reporting, investigations, and access to records. In addition to these, and as you heard about a little earlier with the AML study, there are hybrid models for fixed and variable costs. And in differing geographies, industry is working with cooperative groups in different models in partnership. And together, these contracts basically ensure that the data are high quality, they're reported in a timely fashion, and they're compliant with regulatory requirements. So what are the consequences of this change been? Well, the data standards for cooperative group trials with registrational potential have become more industry-like. Also, the costs of cooperative group trials with registrational potential have become more industry-like. And then there's been an evolution of the benefits and risks of partnership. Increased likelihood of regulatory approval, reduced financial attractiveness, and attention to other trade-offs in a global environment. Speaking to what we heard from Dr. Abrams and some of the talks that I missed yesterday, I'd like to applaud the progress of the National Clinical Trials Network in their efficiency and quality, including the time from concept submission to activation being reduced. I also found the metrics for the central IRB use really impressive. I actually was one of the proponents of getting the CRB to Stanford when I worked there. I sat through many CTAC meetings, and I think this looks really good. One point I do want to raise to your attention is this issue of the time to concept prioritization and submission. This means the time when you really start discussing with a few investigators and then more investigators and then at this group and that group and the other group, then go through the groups and take all the time to bubble up to the disease steering committees. That has to be balanced against maybe working with a cooperative group in Europe that will be at a single meeting, they make their decision, they're ready to go forward, or what would be internal decisions. And I think developing some metrics around that would be really helpful. And then the data management improvements that we heard about do address the key industry considerations as well as regulatory for quality, timeliness, and cost. And we now have revisions in the intellectual property for investigational agents in working with NCI, and I think these IP options for diagnostic inventions are now really clearly delineated, and they allow sponsors to assess these risks of partnership. So turning to safety for a couple of slides and going back to what we heard from Rich and then Rachel, you know, the goal is to ensure that data are collected in a manner that is adequate to reliably assess whether an investigational agent has a good risk-to-benefit ratio. And that would be a significant improvement in outcome when added to or in contrast to a known standard, the ability to assess the safety impact of the addition or substitution for the known standard, and to assess whether there are subsets of patients for whom the risk-benefit ratio is different. And we believe the emphasis should be on collecting and integrating critical safety and efficacy data. These are some proposed safety standards for approved agents for subsequent registrational in other disease settings, to collect grade 3-4 adverse events on a cycle-specific basis in a subset of patients, to collect deaths, discontinuations, serious AEs, and AEs leading to dose modification in all patients, to collect targeted concomitant medications and AEs based on known safety and pharmacology, detailed adverse event profile in subpopulations of interest, perhaps those with impaired organ function or the elderly, may be better addressed in very specific phase 2 or phase 4 studies that are addressing these issues. What we heard from Rich and the data optimization working group analysis supports a targeted safety collection, and the agency February 2012 draft guidance indicates that targeted safety collection may be appropriate in some settings. Fit-for-purpose data collection is attractive to industry. It obviously conserves resources, and then it will allow us to go broader in testing innovative medicines in more disease settings. Detailed regulatory guidance with clear directives on data collection requirements is needed, and this was going to also require international harmonization for global registration. And a pre-specified plan for selective data collection must be agreed upon by the FDA and global health authorities. So in summary, I'd like to bring it back to what is attractive for industry to work with the cooperative groups. And there are many attractions. Our shared goal to impact the standard of care and address unmet need, access to disease and scientific expertise, the potential to extend product development to additional indications, access to rare populations, not just rare populations, but also to children, to larger adjuvant settings, a lower cost financial model, operational ability of the cooperative groups, enhanced scientific credibility. That's important. Access to innovation and product use and study design. I think a commitment to U.S. patients for promising therapies and maintaining and developing a critical mass of U.S. clinical trial specialists, and opportunities for professional partnership and shared impact. And also, I would say that it's a way of, again, honoring patients who are participating in these cooperative group studies that can become registrational and change the standard of care. And so, coming back to where we started, the real foundation is a mutual respect, a trust and passion for science in improving patient outcomes, and that is what has driven and will continue to drive academic, industry, and cooperative group partnerships. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sandra, for those great insights. So, as we've been talking about, and as we all recognize, all of cancer drug development now is really a global enterprise, which means that drug developers have to be cognizant of regulatory requirements in multiple jurisdictions around the world. So it's really great to have Francesco Pignati here from the EMA to at least give us some perspectives from the European regulatory authorities regarding cancer drug development. So, Francesco.